Welcome to Design Thinking Games, a fantasy and user experience podcast. Each episode, your podcast hosts, Tim Broadwater and Michael Schofield, will examine the player experience of board games, pen and paper role-playing games, live-action games, mobile games, and video games. You can find every episode, including this one, on your podcatcher of choice and on the web at designthinkinggames.com.
So last night is Thursday evening, which for many Dungeons and Dragons player is their game night. It's a holy day on the week. We had a couple of our players had guests in town, and so I was able to randomly generate a class for them. Here's an example of kind of like what was counterintuitive for a new D&D 5th edition player who about the class system. They come in to play a game. This scenario that they're dropping into, they're picking up our party. The Quarriors have found their way into Temple of Denier, out in the living dunes, deep in the sands.
This is your homebrew,
this
right?
is it's a little hybrid homebrew.
Okay.
And think of Brendan Fraser's The Mummy, right? When they go way out.
I love that movie. It's a good movie.
And so here they are, trying to get into the heart of this mysterious sand-covered temple. The new players, our party guests are picking up the roles of a couple of the retainers that the party had hired to help them, do some of the labor around traveling. But here we are. Okay, so these players who are guests of the party are picking up the roles of some of the retainers that help the party do some laborious travel. They're the ones who carry all the heavy packs, things like that. I happen to know, because of the mechanics of the game and some of the homebrew that we're playing, that one of these is a lower class or lower level ranger and the other is a lower level barbarian. So I randomly generate these characters at that level and I dole them out. The issue is that this first scenario for two people in this session is one full of puzzles. They are deep in this temple and they're not fighting bad guys or zombies or sand creatures. They are trying to get from chamber to chamber by solving riddles. It's one of those things. So what do players do around the table? They start in on solving the riddles, and riddle time is one of those parts of a game where
it sounds like a children's show.
Yeah.
No,
it's good. Riddle time is the part of the game where I think the line between the player and the character really blurs, right? You can sometimes have a character who's smarter than you, and they may roll to get some added insight that you as a player might not actually know. But generally, you, the player, you, Tim, is the one who is trying to solve the puzzle. It's no longer your character, it's you. So what we had was this person who's playing Hyther, the barbarian, was making really good guesses at some of these puzzles as they go. All the while, when periodically she had to roll like an Arcana check or a history check or anything that had to rely on intelligence, she had a -1, right? So her character is by class, so just especially by the random assortment or the random allotment of skills for this barbarian class, is dumb as rocks, but the player is quite smart. And when she failed every single intelligence check that was made, she was really confused because she's like, damn, the player, solved the riddle or could solve this riddle, but my character is stupid. And it's one of those things where she found that the constraint of the class was like, and was really confusing. all this to say, this is the anecdote that I wanted to lead into when we start talking about the mechanics and the design of particularly like RPGs where powers and skills and capacities are organized in classes, engineers or soldiers or adepts or barbarians, as opposed to the alternate, which is some sort of like classless game design where you level up a certain ability through use.
Yeah, there is a couple things there. I know you told me in the past that you've never played Dungeons and Dragons before 5th edition.
Yeah,
that's a grasping the pearls moment for me. Because I'm just like, what? How is that even possible? Because I know you know.
The reason I brought that up is because there's a lot of discussion in the hashtag TTRPG Twitter about the constraints of classes in D&D 5th edition and going classless, and I thought this was new.
No, it's always baked into D&D, and so let me give you some. I never played the original, the OG Gygax Dungeons and Dragons. I played Advanced, and then Advanced 2nd edition, and kind of so on. So I played 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. In 1st edition, I can't speak to it because I literally don't remember. But I spent many years playing 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. In 2nd edition, it was the kick in the gut to dual class or multi-class. And the reason why is if you went along and you were a barbarian and you got to 3rd or 4th level and you're like, hey, I want to pick up, a thief kind of thing, like to pull off maybe a barbarian thief, kind of like Conan is, kind of in the movie. You have to stop. You get nothing from it's like it made no sense, because to start over just to learn to pickpocket and use thief tools and sneak, you didn't retain anything in your brain about being a barbarian until you got up to that 3rd or 4th level again. And then once you were 3rd or 4th level and you got to the same point you were with like rogue or thief with a barbarian, then you could pursue both. Like you would split your experience, right?
Wow, that's hardcore.
And it was just like, dude, there's a huge difference between a 1st and a 4th level character, just like there's a 7th and a 10th level character difference, right? And so when you are rolling with your buddies and you're playing and you're just like, oh crap, now I go back to level 1, they're gonna have to carry me for like a while. And so it was really clumsily done, just for the reason that you specifically said, because it didn't seem real. It didn't seem that you could have a smart barbarian, that you could have a magic user who could fight, like martial arts, not martial, but like melee, right? Could fight in melee. But we all were raised with Gandalf and read Lord of the Rings, so we were like, well, this doesn't make sense. Gandalf had a sword. How does, you know what I mean? And so I think it was to me, and this is kind of stepping back and looking at it, is like, I think classes, they can be great and they've worked for years, but I think what we're seeing now is this push towards what are more sophisticated or realistic or advanced ways that we can put skills and proficiencies and abilities together than having it being divided in these silos, right? Like a silo, like if you want to heal someone, or versus if you want to steal from someone versus if you want to be able to fight on a horse. I mean, it's like, no, those are 3 classes. Never shall the twain meet, And I think that's a lot of people's experience with tabletop RPGs until maybe recently.
Yeah, like it occurred to me while you were talking, and I decided to Google just to just to see if there's some evidence here. But to me, the idea of like classes plays really well when you think of the party as a single unit, right? Where the only way that, because the reality, when you as a group of players in a collaborative game are playing against a big bad, you're going after the white dragon or you're facing down Cthulhu, is that it's not 5 individuals versus the hulking beast. It is a party unit, your coterie, your group that is together composes a well-defined opponent to the bad guy, because you have the tank and you have the healer and you have the spell slinger and so on, right? But increasingly, especially with the popularity of like D&D in the last couple of years, thanks in part to the pandemic and Critical Role before that, and is that Dungeons and Dragons and these kind of RPGs, and maybe it dovetails with the popularity and scale of single player RPGs that have come out, like Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls games. But it seems to me that now when I'm playing with my group of players, or I'm playing by myself, or I'm listening to people talk about kind of like the meta conversation around D&D, it's the RPG is an exploration of the individual as opposed to like the group dynamic. It's really highlighting those individual features.
Yeah, so if you think of like traditional role-playing games to where it's like, who's our healer? We can't even go if we don't have a healer.
Yeah,
there's some truth about that, where it's like we have to have a paladin will not cut it. We need a cleric or something, or a life oracle or something like that, right? And I think that's something that over time kind of evolves. And not that it was bad, it was just it's just not realistic, right? And I think if you look at 2 modern systems that I'm aware of, well, let me just say Starfinder, which is the sci-fi tabletop role-playing game from Paizo. Are you aware of it?
I'm aware of it because you talk about it all the time, but I've never once played it.
Yeah, so it actually won in its first year best RPG of the year, like tabletop role-playing game of the year, because I just think it was time where it was a good time. People were sick of high fantasy and they wanted something different.
Oh, sure.
And it's kind of like Mass Effect, but the role-playing game, you know what I mean? So there's like all these like insane amount of player races, alien races that you can play and whatever. But what Starfinder does that I really like is that since it's the future and it's space, everyone, if you think of these things that are like, okay, magical items, tech, cybernetics, robots, those are things that anyone can have. That's all kind of offloaded into a lot of skills are offloaded into that. Like, you don't need to play a winged race because, dude, everyone can buy a jetpack, and it's kind of like everyone can buy anti-gravity boots. Everyone can have a drone with a camera on it. Everyone can have, these kind of things. So it kind of levels a lot of the playing field. And then really what it is, what I think a lot of people like about Starfinder and find it refreshing is that with the combination of the unique things and what is it called? Eccentricities? I don't know what word I'm looking for, but the unique characteristics of I guess what I'm trying to say is classes don't matter so much anymore. Your alien race matters. And if you can all get magical items and tech and cybernetics and whatever, and a vehicle and a spaceship, it adds enough play to it. So it really comes down to more of the character flavor that you want. It's not limiting, right? There are many different ways you can heal yourself. You can do it with serums, you can do it with med kits, you can do it with magic, and you can have access to all those things. So it's a combination. So if you think of like offloading all your skills that way, like, hey, I don't need to put like a lot into computers or hacking, but I could have a robot with me that hacks computers for me, you know what I mean, or something like that. It kind of lets you kind of do whatever you want. And the classes themselves in Starfinder, in my opinion, they don't have a lot of crazy abilities. I mean, there's some cool stuff, but they generally can only really do like one thing. And so, like, you're either, everyone can fire laser weapons, so everyone can range attack, right? Everyone can use melee weapons. So the classes are like, well, this one's maybe better at melee, or this one's better, or this one inherently gets magic. But that doesn't mean you can't use magic. So it opens it up enough to where you don't have to worry about, kind of being pigeonholed into being one thing, like in older RPGs. And Paizo, which does Pathfinder and Starfinder, and there's Pathfinder First and Second Edition. First Edition, Second Edition, and Starfinder. Well, I will say this: First Edition and Starfinder lets you add every level. So at every level, you can say, like, I'm going to be a Vanguard, and then the next level, the class I'm going to take is an Envoy, and then I'm going to take 2 soldiers, and then so each level you can just add a new class, and as long as you can meet the requirements for that class, like at least you have to have the basic strength or wisdom score or whatever, you can custom build it as you level up. There's no kind of penalty. However, when they released Pathfinder 2nd Edition 2 years ago, they nerfed that because I think they found out, like, although people loved it because you could be a barbarian, wizard, bard, you know what I mean, if you wanted to, and have something cool. What they found is that characters got really OP quickly. They became overpowered. So in 2nd Edition Pathfinder, when you level, if you start out as let's say a rogue or a thief, you are always a rogue or a thief. However, the way that they have tons of feats in 2nd Edition. There are racial feats, there are class feats, there are combat feats, and everyone gets everything, right? You can sack some of your class feats as a rogue. So you're like, I can pick pockets, but okay, I'm not going to get hide in shadows. But I will sack my hide in shadows to get access to cleric, abilities. Oh, and so they've made it to where you can kind of learn and do things from other classes, but the penalty is, and it's not really a penalty, it's like, but it's not, you're not going to advance as much as you do as a rogue if you are also going to heal people, but it doesn't penalize you,
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of want to rewind a minute to your mention that they discovered that players kind of doing or building however they wanted ended up creating like really overpowered characters. And I think that's probably the argument for class, is like in terms of the design of the system of the game, that I imagine classes make it easier to balance, right? You see this kind of expressed in really counterintuitive ways in some shooters. I like my first person shooters, and the war game I really like is I prefer the Battlefield series to just about everything else. And recently they have really excellent rifles class locked to a medic class that you would think would be available to a sniper class or an assault class or any class really. But they do that precisely because the specific intricacies of class A added to the buffs and like abilities of weapon B create something that is indomitable like on the game
100%,
field.
Yeah.
So it's weird, and it's hard as a player not to run into that cognitive leap. It's almost like an uncanny valley where you're like, wow, this is really not real. This is not how it would be like in an act, like if you actually like set foot in the game, which is probably exacerbated as games become increasingly realistic. And
there's the opposite to that as well. Like even more of a rejection or run away from reality. Like I want fantasy, I want ridiculous, I want overpowered, you know?
One of the themes that we've been talking about for, you know, the many episodes now have been about like the role of player customization in that like overall experience. And it's one of those things where classes really get in the way. These are real barriers.
I also, I don't know what other kind of class versus classless mechanics you're a fan of or you like, but I kind of like one of the things we talked about here recently, I think, was Morkborg. Yeah, so Morkborg is an old school revival. It is a brutal, like, post-apocalyptic game, and it is essentially, but you have limited stats. The cool thing about Morkborg is you have limited stats, you have limited health, damage attributes, or whatever. Whenever you level up, it is basically like White Wolf or World of Darkness, to where it's like you get dots. Now you can put those dots on whatever you want. It could be your vampire power of celerity, or it could be your claws as a werewolf, or it could be just your health. But it's just like you actually choose what you want to be good at because you just get dots.
Yeah, and
right?
it's just a finite amount of dots.
Yeah, and so maybe you do a campaign, and at the end of the campaign you level up, and it's like you get 3 dots. And so it's really how you could then make yourself super fast, or make yourself more healthy, or, you know, or whatever, or good at firearms. I mean, it's really, you know, it's kind of that open system. And Morkborg is like that as well as the old school Marvel superheroes role-playing game. Like when you level up, you essentially can increase... Marvel's Superhero, the role-playing game, is an old tabletop role-playing game that I want to actually start running a campaign for here in the next couple of months, just because I hadn't played it since I was in like middle school, and it's like a fun... If you ever want to play a superhero-based tabletop role-playing game, I highly suggest Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, but it is essentially the same. You have powers... However you get them, it doesn't matter if they're tech, alien, magic, whatever. You have knowledge and you have resources. And so essentially, if you want to make yourself better at driving cars, or make your laser eyes like more powerful, or you want to have more money, I mean, it's where you put, it's like the dots for like White Wolf. It's where you put them. So it doesn't really, you know, matter.
Where does it, like when it comes to balance, like where does having like a finite amount of points to expend, like how do you prevent that OP nature? How, like what prevents you from putting, you know, 5 points into firearms, which maxes it out, or is it nothing? Does it just...
No, it's kind of how it's what I like about White Wolf, and you may be able to speak to this too, like the White Wolf tabletop, you know, role-playing game, or Marvel Superheroes, or Morkborg, or others that are classless based systems, but have this, you know, kind of not a skill tree, but it's like you get what you get, like experience, and you can put it however you want to your character in whatever way. It's kind of just denoted like through role-playing, or through what you do in your downtime, quote unquote, is that. And so if you want your character to be like really good at ranged attacks or firearms or weapons, you kind of, that's what you focused on, and you work it into your character. Like, oh, I started going to the gun range with my human friend. He doesn't know I'm a vampire, but you know, and then I started getting really good at shooting, and then that's something that you can take over.
This is part of the
But
plan,
you can also say that you worked on your speed or your celerity, right? So you could move super quick.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. If it's for richness or resources, then it's basically like, oh, you spent a month or 2 weeks or whatever your downtime is doing PR, spinning up a website, doing some podcast interviews, or, you know, but then people know you and recognize you. So, you know, it's kind of, so it lets you play whatever character you want to play and grow it however you want to grow it. And it doesn't always have to be, I will never get these powers or abilities, because I'm limited by a class.
Yeah, and that's the key. Let's say you're a ranger in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and you are hanging out with a wizard who, in your travails, you have lifted the spell books of many another wizard antagonist, right? So you have, like, in your downtime, ample opportunity. Let's say you have 5 spell books in your party, one belonging to your own wizard, and then just 4 others that you've looted. You have ample opportunity in, like, a long rest, like over the course of a campaign, to maybe study, but the system will not let you earn certain or use certain spells because those spells are locked to the wizard class or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's a particular gripe, right? Because the uncanny valley comes in when you are told, for system reasons, that under no circumstances could your forest-born wood elf ever learn this spell, even if it's taught to you by the creator of that spell or something like that.
100%. Yeah, it's like you're never going to learn. And in Pathfinder 2nd edition, they actually have like occult magic, nature magic, arcane magic, and divine magic, right? They have 4 magic sources, where they used to have psychic magic too, which was
like telekinesis and
basically mind magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what they called it, but it's basically everything you think of a psionicist or a telepath or whatever. But no, I agree with you, and I think the reason why, and I'm not going to say it's lazy, because I think it has to work, like content-wise, and map to a game, and you're not super powerful super early. But the reason why the White Wolf, kind of Morkborg, Marvel superhero, like the dots, like you get dots and points, whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
It maps to video games really easily. Whenever you complete a quest or you kill X amount of people, you get an experience, you level up, boom, you get a dot, you get a point.
It's a
and
conditional
you can put it
structure.
wherever you want. And so if you want to be faster, or a lot of people in games go to the strategy like, dude, I'm going to max out my health first, so I have just a huge health bar, right?
Sure.
Or I'm going to max out my defense so I don't, or my attack. So, everyone plays differently, and it's not lazy. I think it's a little lazy, but it's like that's an easy go-to experience system. But the thing it affords you, we call it lazy or not, is also you can kind of work to what you want. You're not locked into trees or in a class, and so
in Vampire, there is a kind of class, however, right? And it's your vampire clan, where I think classes play a role, which I think is interesting because I like to play low fantasy, gritty games that deal with real things, hashtag. And that's one of the reasons that I like the World of Darkness when we talked about it in that episode, is because it's this world. It's just a little more supernatural. One of the things where I think classes work, and vampires have, the vampire class system is their clan, which it does restrict. I mean, for the most part, like with the different disciplines, the vampire powers that you have access to, like only the Brujah have maybe potence and celerity and, the kind of like the powers that you think of in terms of vampires being super strong and super fast. And the clan that you choose as a player tailors your experience not to the skills that you can develop, but like the potential for your vampiric power.
I think what you're saying, and it's been a while, it's been a minute since I've played, Vampire.
We should play a vampire game.
That or werewolf, is that the whole point of the clan or a werewolf tribe or whatever it is that there's actually certain powers that only that clan gets access to, that are passed down through turning. But then there's a general vampire pool, right? Like werewolf, to where you can just kind of get general powers that all vampires could get. Is that correct?
No, like at least not in the old World of Darkness, right? Like it really is that the idea of the clan, like when I think of a class that works, a class system, the idea of the clan is really on the nose, because the clan is effectively about in this case vampiric, but the social strata into which you are born, you can't escape the nature of your clan. Now, all vampires have things in common. They're pretty hungry. They have something within them called the beast that wants to come out whenever there's a hint of blood in the air or the
like
threat of
claws.
fire.
Can not all vampires have claws?
No, not in the original. Well, so in OWAD, so there's World of Darkness 1, and now we're in World of Darkness 3, World of Darkness 2. This is I made a huge caveat when we talked in this episode that I played in the late 90s through the early 2000s, right? So that's my time.
So it's like gangrels can only get claws.
Only gangrels could get claws. Now, how do you, let's say, one of the Toreador, who's considered sort of like the bougie clan, how do you get gangrel powers? It's like, well, you kill a gangrel and you suck their soul out of them, right?
Like you kill one and drink their blood, and you can get it that way.
Well, you do more than drink their blood. You literally consume their very essence, and there's a game mechanic. It's called Diablerie, and there's a mechanic where that can go awful for you, but if it works, yeah, you
get powers from other bloodline clans.
Yeah. Exactly. What I like about certain I've seen some homebrews in Dungeons and Dragons that I've considered because I feel constrained by classes now. But one of the things I like is a class or a kind of certain features or skills that are unlocked by your background. Like, I think there's something kind of interesting about the idea is like, oh, my family is a noble, my family are nobles, and we have all these resources, and thus I am an excellent researcher, right? But like, oh, it's like I was a peasant child born like next to a lumber mill. You're probably illiterate. I think that's compelling, and I love the idea. Whereas, like, when there's a game that Amazon is developing called New World that you put me onto that I've been watching interestingly, because I'm pretty sure that it is a classless MMO.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the reasons, even in general topic about it, because it looks amazing. And that's the big selling point that they keep pushing. It's like, no classes, be whatever you want to be, build who you want to build. Everyone's on the same playing field, It's
amazing.
Yeah, so for like New World, I know that there are a lot of people where I work who are like interested in getting on board, and they're doing a beta now or an alpha now. Unfortunately, what you do in the alpha or beta doesn't get copied over to...
I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't get copied over to the actual game. So to me, and every player is different, but for me, that is like, well, I'm just going to wait till it starts.
Right.
And I know you'd pay more to get on the alpha or the beta just to get like, a new custom item set or like a cool armor piece or a cool mount. But that doesn't appeal. That's not enough spin for me to be like, you can play and waste it all. And you know what I mean? And it doesn't go anywhere. But like what I like about New World is exactly this thing to where it's like, we are totally embracing this classless system. It's a points build. And my understanding of the limited stuff I've watched is if you think about Pirates of Caribbean time period, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's basically like, we have technology to some degree. We have simple steam machines, and there's gunpowder, and there's muskets and guns, right? And there's giant like armadas and sailing across the sea. Basically, it's an alternate version of history where they find an island. I guess it's named Aeternum or Aeternum.
I get like Eternum, yeah.
And and I will be an Amazon fanboy and say, everything that Amazon touches is gold.
Yeah.
They know desirability. They know the difference between usability and desirability, and they give people desirability. And so a lot of people are very excited for, what Amazon can do to try to experience it. And I'll definitely be checking it out.
Yeah. As much as I like to even treat in my normal life. Like, like we utter the word Amazon and spit over our shoulder and sprinkle salt on our ancestors or some shit. But like, but they are winning because they're good. And
they know what people want and what will people pay for, and and that's what they give them.
There's something in here. Yeah. So like their entire like about page. I'm excited when we get a chance to play this. I really want to break down like some of the design choices they make. Is this style of classlessness and do as you will like the future? I would love to really pick the mind of someone who's working on the engines underneath something like this, about how they think about it. Because when I think about, gosh, if I were to design a game, even at like a small level, like at a game that just exists within the four corners of a table, I to your point, I think classes are easier to balance, right?
Yeah, and you're definitely
so like the difficulty of the development probably increases exponentially to give the player this kind of experience. But if they nail it, then this is going to be sticky, because and maybe this is a good dovetail into like a subsequent episode, something that we've never even put on our board, but I'm thinking about it because if this game gets legs and there's a player base and Amazon really leans into it, they're going to embellish this experience with cross-platform opportunities. Imagine Alexa tells you, "Oh my gosh, there's someone waiting for you at your fish market to make a transaction."
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, dude.
It's happening.
Microtransactions definitely is already probably baked into it. There's also, I think, when you think about the quest for the most usable game, and we talk about yet another metric or slider, right? Realism, some of the things that you said versus realism versus fantasy, where some people would say, well, that's not realistic. In the real world, you have to devote for years to just learn how to become a sword master. So you should be, if you're a samurai class, you should only get this, and people outside the class shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I see that. I get it. I'm like, that. I do get it. That's realism. Some people don't want that in games. Like the realism piece of like studying your class being locked down versus like being a phenomenal sniper, or like what's my shooting time and what's the kickback of the gun. That's a type of realism. But there's also the fantasy side, right? Which is, why can't I transform into a cat, swing a giant magic sword, and cast lightning fireballs, and be able to pick pockets, So it's like, oh well. So it kind of also depends on what people want out of the game.
Tim, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
That's true.
Thank you for listening to the Design Thinking Games podcast. To connect with your hosts, Michael or Tim, please go to designthinkinggames.com, where you can request topics, ask questions, or see what else is going on. Until next time, game on.